A single person, however gifted, can rarely alter the character of a nation's culture. Ceoltóirí managed to do this for Ireland. His is an achievement so complete that it is dissolved in a living tradition of its own making, the echoes of which travel the world. Let us honor, if we can, the vertical man, though we value none but the horizontal one. Ceoltóirí was a composer, a performer, and a visionary. He was a son of Ireland who embraced its culture and language. He transformed Irish musical life. He died only 40 years of age in 1971. He stood, a lad, the odd man out, at the gates of art, history, and myth.
I don't think he's remembered and celebrated enough. I think the importance of his contribution is underestimated. It's concealed by other things. A rescue of Irish music, an aspect of the Irish achievement, from a demeaned state, giving it back its authority and its dignity and its quality. Doing what great artists do in the process, providing a personal contribution so that he gives it his own personal colour.
I once saw a vision when I was 21 years old. I really did see a vision, a most frightening thing. I had come from Dublin on the train which stopped at Kilmallock. No buses were running. As usual, I was not in agreement with my parents, so they hadn't sent a car. Outside Kilmallock, a long straight road stretches in front of you so that you can see clearly ahead for 2 miles. I had been walking for about 15 minutes when suddenly I saw a woman coming towards me. She hadn't been there a second before. She was wearing a long red skirt, a white blouse, and had a shawl around her shoulders. The hair stood up on the back of my head. I was terrified. As she passed me, I followed her round like a magnet. Suddenly, she wasn't there anymore. That, I think, was a real vision, a real Aisling. Sometimes I just lie out like ballast in the bottom of the boat, listening to the cuckoo. You can actually hear the music on the air. To be born is to hear sounds. Mine were the traditional sounds of Irish music. I came to understand and love them.
Perhaps as Irish people we were ready for something to change. We have been taking the image which we've got from outside of ourselves of the kind of whimsical, romantic fairies at the bottom of the garden, slightly drunken, not very solid citizens really, the Irish. So I think the ground was ripe for somebody to come along and say, let's look at ourselves again and try and rediscover the people who were imaginative, who were cultured, who knew things about Greek and Latin, who read, who were interested in learning, not so much education, but learning. And I think that he just came at the right time to light that spark. And so that spark has been beginning to blaze ever since then.
He was the voice of the tribe. He was the voice of the people at that time. It was a nation regaining its soul. He was instrumental in that. The kind of Irish music that was being expressed at that time was going down a very different route. It wouldn't have what they call the call. It wouldn't have that effect, that honesty of expression that comes with being the voice of a people. And I think that arose not because of his genius or his doing, but because the tribe put him there at that time. He was an instrument of the Irish people as a whole, collective consciousness, as it were. And that's the reason that his music was so potent.
The progress of our traditions in Ireland is like the flow of a river. Foreign bodies may fall or be dropped or thrown in, but they do not divert the course of the river, nor do they stop it flowing. It absorbs them, carrying them with it as it flows onwards. The strongest surviving tradition that we have is our music. Let nobody say that our traditions are inferior to those of any other country. They are our traditions, and as such, they suit us best. I had been born in 1931 in Cork City. They called me John Reedy. I can't remember a time when I didn't love music and want to compose.
Part of the problem with Sean is that there are so many interests, but I think music is what came absolutely naturally to him. He was interested in so many other things, and I suppose there was a certain amount of pressure on him to do sensible things, that music was regarded as certainly frivolous. When he went to college, he went on a scholarship to Cork to UCC, and it was to do arts. So it was Greek and Latin were supposed to be the subjects. But he naturally found himself falling into music in all kinds of ways. And then at the end of the first year, he decided to change over to music completely.
Mayfain, me, myself, in English.
We just thought it was funny. Found it in music. So he was John, Sean. He eventually became more Sean than John.
I came here as John Reedy to learn about European music, but Irish music didn't figure. Here it was Beethoven and Mozart, Bach, Mahler, Schoenberg. It was their world that I explored. My biggest wish was to be a great composer.
His mother was a very spirited woman who loved music, loved the accordion, loved conversation. She was, of course, the woman who spotted his genius at a very early stage. I remember her telling me a very funny story that he was probably only, I think she said 9 months, but doubtless there was an exaggeration, when he sat up in his pram and uttered the word Constantinople, and that she knew immediately that she had a genius in her hands.
Clatter of harpsichord, the music leaping like a candle flame to light ancestral faces. Pride of music, pride of race.
Above all, he was a very brilliant person. He made his mark very fast. He was terribly well informed on pretty well everything. He managed it very lightly. He was very achieved. He was able to contribute at any level. Politics, music, art, anything. So he was a very easy person to get to know and to like.
From my early days at school, I loved the culture of Greece, the works of Homer, Aeschylus and Sophocles. Their aesthetics have a strictness of form. As to my own music, I explored it within this classical world.
At the age of 22, to everyone's surprise, O'Riordan landed a job as assistant head of music at Radio Éireann.
He had got married. He was in a job which he found absolutely frustrating. Sitting in a studio all day listening to different groups, he just found it unbearable. As a young man, having dreams, and suddenly the dreams didn't seem to be possible with so much responsibility. And so I would think that This drove him to making a bid for freedom and making a bid for finding another world, finding what was out there.
4 years of Radio Éireann was enough. Ó Riada abandoned job and family and went to Paris to play jazz.
Sean wasn't one for following beaten tracks. The big thing about Sean in a whole lot of ways is his own life. That, in a way, is some sort of testament in itself. The good and the bad, the up and down of it, as being almost some sort of musical symphony that touches all sorts of emotions.
He didn't have connections in Paris. He didn't have people he could depend on or call on, and so he was really on his own. He didn't have the wherewithal to support him for long enough to make his way in Paris, to get to know the people. And whereas he did give one recital, if not two, on Paris radio, I don't think he had, the wherewithal to stay. So I think it was a choice. He didn't have a choice, really, except to come back and come home.
After several months, Ó Riada was making no progress in Paris. And then Ruth, his wife, tracked him down and dragged him back to family and responsibility.
My adventures in Paris were not wasted. My response was immediate. My first experiments were orchestral pieces which I called nomoi, pieces of serial composition that strictly followed the laws of classical aesthetics.
Music is a byproduct of something else much more fundamental. Sean lived 40 years, 20 years learning, and then the first 10 years studying the European and modern world idiom. He was very aware of popular music, of all forms of classical music, whether it is Indian or Oriental music, or indeed Western European classical music, as he was of jazz and everything else, and of course of Irish classical music. He was completely captivated by the world of classical Ireland, Old Ireland, Hibernia.
The European tradition at the moment is painted into a corner. I don't see any future for it unless it can adapt itself to the world as it is. Irish music is not merely not European, it is quite remote from it. It is in fact closer to some forms of Oriental music. The first thing we must do if we are to understand Irish music is to forget about European music. Its standards are not Irish standards, its style is not Irish style, its forms are not Irish forms.
Ó Riada was making his living as composer in residence at the Abbey Theatre, Dublin, his career seemingly in the doldrums. Then in 1959 he was approached to write a film score. The subject could not have been more appropriate for his talents and feelings. Mise Eire, I Am Ireland, the story of Ireland's struggle for political freedom up to the Easter Rebellion of 1916.
When he actually walked into the arena of Irish music in the 1960s, it was for the first time a slowing down of emigration, a new wealth, a new economic growth. Ireland suddenly began to feel, maybe we're not so bad. Suddenly O'Riordan was there at that moment making these sounds. And I suppose in Mise Eire it just exploded.
We are a very small country. We can't support a large number of composers. You're lucky if you get one who is a good composer. I'm not saying I am that one.
We were listening to composers here in the country arranging Irish suites. We were never pleased with these things at all. They were neither traditional nor were they good musically. But he took on this music for the film Mise Eire, and he took those wonderful airs that were in existence at the time, some very, very old, and he moulded them around with the orchestra.
Mise Eire made O'Riordan a star. But even as he was finding establishment fame, his thoughts turned to his roots in the west of Ireland.
They settled down in Ballyferriter. He met me there and was very excited about the music that he'd found in Dunquin. It's when he went to the West and met these great musicians and traditional Irish music that the whole kit came together. The rediscovery of traditional Irish song and instrumental music. It engaged all his abilities.
You were looked down on to be playing traditional music. I had a little tin whistle, but I always had to have it in my pocket. And I know fiddle players who used to put the fiddles under their coats.
He was trying to say to people, this is Irish traditional music. You hear it all the time, but you don't listen. He gave them almost a vocabulary to talk about the music.
Up to Sean O'Riordan, you had céilí bands as the accepted way of group playing of Irish music.
And the Ceilidh band is on the line, everybody plays the tune the same time, the same way, for 2.5 hours. But Sean broke that up.
He drew together the best individual traditional musicians. Now, he did a thing which was next to impossible. He welded them together as a unit. This was based on the idea of the New Orleans Dixieland Jazz Band, where the soloist got his head and then it was all drawn together at the end. Every development and practically every group in Irish music since then would still be influenced by him, even though they mightn't know much of him. You know, it amazes me that, like, young musicians growing up now, that they always look upon the Oíche music as kind of the real pure, you have river dance and all these things, but this would be the mountain, stream, unpolluted. And I think that's very, very important.
Oíche took the traditional Irish fiddles and pipes and combined them with the harpsichord and the Irish drum, the bowron, to form a new ensemble, Ceoltóirí. As a group, they performed on stage to an enthusiastic public, quick to respond to the seeming rake with tradition.
People who say that things should not be changed, people who are too conservative, are in fact making a great mistake, because certainly things will be retained in their original form anyway, and experimentation, whether it's by a piper, a singer, or a fiddle player, can't do any harm, and it may produce something good.
He wasn't really fitted for a career in straight classical music. What he was able to do was to inspire and energize the musicians that he worked with to produce wonderful overall music and entertainment without losing any caliber of any kind.
I was waiting there nervously on a wet winter's day, and a taxi drew up, and this immediately larger-than-life figure emerged with a Donegal tweed overcoat drawn tightly around him. The hair was being tossed by the wind. A cigar was doing its best to stay alight. I gave him one whiskey. He sat down at a piano, and he asked me what song I'd like to sing. He taught me to stop thinking about my voice as being a very beautiful thing. I should concentrate on expressing what was within the song and letting the story of the song do my thinking for me. In English, you'll be asked to sing a song. In Irish, it's aber oran, say a song. He didn't think that anybody could sing properly until you were at least 40 years of age and had experienced sufficient of life, you know. Having passed that long ago, I would agree with him that you see things from a different perspective. And I suppose one regret that I have is that in my 40s and 50s, I never had him as an accompanist because he was gone.
The simplest picture of traditional Irish art is the ancient symbol of the serpent with its tail in its mouth. My end is my beginning. This is the graph of real life. Every day the sun rises, every day it sets. Every day possesses the same basic characteristics, follows the same fundamental pattern, while at the same time each day differs from the next in its ornamentation of events. The particular events of each day are to the basic pattern of days as the particular ornamentation of each verse of a song is to the basic pattern of all the verses of that song. This is the idea that has lain at the root of all traditional Irish art since pre-Christian times.
In 1964, O'Riordan uprooted his family from the comfort of their home in Dublin and took them all to live in the Gaeltacht, the Irish-speaking part of the west of Ireland. They settled in the village of Cualann. Here, he began to consolidate his ideas and his re-energizing of Irish music and culture.
He was possibly freer as a person when he moved to Cualann. He seemed to find what he was doing much more rewarding. And I think he found the area very conducive to him spiritually. It appealed to him too, the whole notion of man and nature and fishing and shooting and all these kind of amusing little idiosyncrasies of his.
That it was a wild and very interesting place. Music and drink were, for me, the two main aspects. It was a very pleasant, very welcoming household. Ruth was a very nice woman. The children adored their father and loved what was going on, and there was never a dull moment.
When he had come from Dublin down to Cualann, all his Dublin people felt that he had kind of deserted the whole classical thing, and certainly from his arrival in Cualann onwards, he was moving more towards the traditional thing, perhaps a bit more towards the liturgical thing.
I don't know anyone that reflects the Mass as well. If you take the Sanctus, the way the word holy or nefa is repeated 3 times, and then the idea of a hosanna at the end of it, the majesty of the sanctity. If you're walking along the coast on a fine day and you feel close to God and His creation, it's that phrase which comes to me. It's certainly genius, but also faith. To match the majesty of O'Riordan's Mass, you must go back to the great Gregorian chant Masses.
In Cualann, I found the rhythms of life I wanted, in a community where Irish was the spoken language. It was a homecoming. My deepest roots were in this area of the Gaeltacht. It was, if you wish, the joining of the ends of my spiritual circle.
O'Riordan's life in Cualann was full. He composed, fished. He entered into his community, almost appropriating it with his enthusiasm. At the same time, he was teaching and lecturing at Cork University. He still loved and yearned after music and felt passionate about all aspects of it.
I despise composers who use pianos. This must be a crutch. I saw a film in which this was given as Benjamin Britten's method of composition. Mahler, one of the greatest composers of the last 100 years with regard to orchestration, never used the piano. You can hear it. He conceived his music entirely in terms of orchestra. We know nothing of Eastern music. People spend their time getting poor old Beethoven to revolve in his grave every 20 minutes of every day. When they take elements from the East, they are just bolstering up their own failing vitality and virility. They take what suits them and immediately corrupt it into their own horrible 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant harmony and rhythm. These composers and popular musicians like the Beatle people are keeping themselves going with infusions of other people's culture. The future must come out of some new synthesis, whereby traditional musicians who understand and appreciate both the European thing and the Oriental thing, as well as, of course, their own thing, can have a new takeoff point. Getting back to the auron, the most common form of auron in the beginning of the 18th century was, of course, the ashling, or vision poem, in which the poet, usually at dusk or at dawn, what's called in Irish Ábhar na híthe or Ábhar na maidne, what's called in French crépuscule du soir, crépuscule du matin, sees, usually on the roadside or possibly by a river, the vision of a lady. Now, there's been a lot of romantic rubbish talked about these dream poems. Some of the, I won't call them scholars, but some of the people who've been talking about them have been excusing this kind of thing in poems by saying that what the poet saw was a personification of Ireland. The earliest ashling poems, of course, were not at all visions of Ireland. They were just visions of women. And this tradition still continues. People are still, in my own parish, writing ashling poems. They have nothing to do whatsoever with Ireland. They have something to do with man's oldest preoccupation.
As he was driven to walk the very lonely road of the classical composer, and at the same time to walk the road of oral tradition music. With O'Riordan, it's almost like two shades passing. He's at the cross section of the two. And I think, in a way, by his own integrity, knowing that following the sound of the bodhrán meant you had to go that way, but keeping faith with whatever was driving him to be a composer. It's almost like a reverse crucifixion.
My fundamental thing was to get the job done, do you see? Sometimes it takes you 3 months, sometimes it takes you 10 years. I worked out my Nomos number 1 in 3 months, but it took me nearly 10 years to work out the problem of Ceoltóirí. But when it was done, it was done. It had become an establishment thing and I killed it.
As Eire immersed himself in life at Cualann, he suddenly disbanded Ceoltóirí. Meanwhile, in Dublin, the Chieftains, which had been formed by Ceoltóirí's Paddy Maloney and containing many of its musicians, was becoming increasingly popular and commercially successful.
The notion of presenting Irish traditional music in a concert format, on a stage platform, but not a céilí band and not a dance band, all of that kind of thing, that energy had found its way through, had worked its way into more a popular music arena, which wasn't the one that Eire, I think, ever intended.
Regarding what the Chieftains are doing, I can't feel anything but sympathy, because the Chieftains are a subsection of my own group, Ceoltóirí, and undoubtedly they would not have come into existence, except for the existence of Ceoltóirí. Therefore, I can't very well, just as a father can't repudiate his own son, I can't repudiate what they are doing. In fact, I admire what they are doing. But it has tremendous limitations. They are limited to doing this kind of thing. I can't see any future for them, which is why I have disbanded Ceoltóirí, the parent group.
The music, it's still there, it's still the same, it'll always be the same beautiful Irish music that Sean saw, and the type of, the type of presentation that he wanted. It's still there, and you'll never change it. It'll never go back to the old way. He changed it at that time, and it's still there. If you listen to stuff done by the original Ceoltóirí and listen to stuff, for instance, now done by the Chieftains today, there's very little difference.
Eire's mood became darker and darker. There was an impression abroad that he was composing less and less, even though, in what were to be the last years of his life, he produced a huge choral piece, Nomos 2, and his third Mass, a requiem for the Irish president, Eamon de Valera.
The story of the Requiem was that he used to meet de Valera, who was president, frequently, and at concerts or at official openings or whatever the hell. And it's said that de Valera used to point him out to people around and say, "That's the man that's writing my Requiem. I hope to hear it before I die." As luck would have it, he heard it and Sean didn't. I think from his point of view, even though I have no evidence for this other than my own intuition, that you can hear echoes in that third Mass that he is bearing de Valera, and with it the last direct connection to the 1916 revolution. In a way, he himself was emotionally very involved in the birth of the nation, and that he felt maybe that his work was done. mean, he lived a very complete life, and he knew that he was going to die. He was fascinated by the whole business of life and death. He spent the last 5 or 6 years studying death at great detail with friends of his that were dying, and he read a lot about it, so much so that my mother thought he had a death wish, which wasn't the case. It was just that he wanted to understand what it was to be alive and to die.
O'Riordan's obsession with death was to be overtaken by events. A failing liver led to hospital in Cork and a mercy flight to a bed in England. He was barely 40 years old.
He was too young, dying. He had worn himself out. And the only piece of communication between himself and myself was silent. When the notion of his impending death had to be faced, and he just gave a kind of shrug in bed. Nothing ever said. I think the sense of waste had to be there, that it was a shame that so much was being left undone.
Sean O'Riordan died far from his native land, in a hospital bed in London.
Oh, God. But to have to die in England.
I wish I was in Carrickfergus, only for nights in Ballygrand. I would swim over the deepest ocean, only for nights in Ballygrand. But the water is wide, and I cannot swim over, and neither have I the wings to fly. I wish I could meet with a handsome boatman to ferry me over, my love and I. And in Kilkenny it is reported they've marble stone there as black as ink. With gold and silver I would support her, and I'll sing no more till I get the drink. I'm drunk today, and I'm seldom sober, a constant rover from town to town. But now I'm sick and my days are numbered. Come all you young men and lay me down.
I remember very vividly the funeral in Cualann. It was an extraordinary experience. And an extraordinary collection of people there from all over the country and, you know, from every walk of life. It was a wet, foggy day, and, you know, mists around the hills down there. And the funeral cortege wound its way up this little road, up the side of the hill, up to the top of the mountain. But the setting was quite, well, not weird, but very dramatic. And into this old graveyard, you know, it was there long before Christianity. It was really an extraordinary, moving scene. It was like the burial of an Irish chieftain. An Irish chieftain being buried on the top of the hill.
Ceoltóirí left 7 young children and his wife Ruth, who had supported his every endeavour. 7 years later, her death compounded the family tragedy.
Life happens, you can't really do anything much about it. All you can do is steer a course through this existence that is honourable.
I don't think there's ever a week goes by that I don't think of him in some form. I might hear a tune, or I play a lot of Irish music. I might hear something, but I always think of Ceoltóirí. He's one of those people that was imprinted, if you like, on my mind.
So I missed him dreadfully. I felt a whole security had disappeared with him. He was vital in support. I couldn't do any wrong. He couldn't misunderstand me. He couldn't attribute false motives to me about anything because he knew me. And I knew him. And so the person he was for me was a gentle, sharing, kindly, amusing friend, as well as brother, big brother.
On the most westerly Blasket, in a dry stone hut, he got this air out of the night. Strange noises were heard by others who followed, bits of a tune coming in on loud weather, though nothing like melody. He blamed their fingers and ear as unpracticed, their fiddling easy, for he had gone alone into the island and brought back the whole thing. The house throbbed like his full violin. So whether he calls it spirit music or not, I don't care. He took it out of the wind off mid-Atlantic. Still he maintains from nowhere. It comes off the bow gravely, rephrases itself into the air.